I was asking about the United derby. Ten Hag having to start on a very bad note, but then had to turn around to win 4 games on the bounce up against another formidable City side who are still in the running to win the league. And I was asking your thoughts on that particular game, which comes up on Sunday.
Yeah, this is going to be another really compelling watch for all the reasons you mentioned. Manchester City are formidable, better even than they were last year because of Erling Haaland and all of the goals he brings. He's a remarkable force of nature, a wonderful athlete, and he makes an already brilliant team even better. So anybody who beats Manchester City or finishes above Manchester City has reason for great pride in that achievement. That is going to be a tough thing to achieve. But Manchester United, from a very low base, from that catastrophic start that you mentioned, appear to have pulled together, appear to have found something like a formula, and in snatches are starting to look like Manchester United should look, like one of the great clubs, refinding a bit of themselves. Very, very early days. You have to be cautious with Manchester United because over the course of the last nearly decade since they were last champions, there have been a few false dawns. They've won 4 games. Back in the day when Manchester United were great, winning 4 games was considered nothing. They kicked on from here. But they're at a different place now. After those awful first couple of weeks, they've got again. That was a great lift to them to beat Liverpool. And then they had those 2 away wins at Southampton and Leicester. Another big lift to beat Arsenal. And so they have beaten big opponents as part of this run. And there is a suggestion that if perhaps they're not quite ready yet to be champions again, they are ready to be a relevant part of the business end, the sharp end, the top end of the Premier League. And knowing what a massive support base they have in your country and indeed all over Africa, indeed all over the world, it would be a great thing for the Premier League if Manchester United were to re-establish themselves as a genuine part of the big-time conversation. And listen, what happens this Sunday is just the next part of demonstrating whether or not they're quite ready to do that. But this is not a game Manchester City can take for granted because United feel as though they're a giant which is stirring now.
Interesting. But United, it's been almost a month now that they haven't played in the Premier League for obvious reasons, for the passing of Her Royal Majesty. And so in the last 4 weeks, they've been out of action up against a City side who before the international break had to beat Wolves. And again, Erling Haaland was in scintillating form. How would the inactivity of United affect them going into the Manchester derby?
Well, it's a really interesting one, this, because you can argue yourself crazy over it. On the one hand, you might argue the players will be fresh because they haven't played too much and so they're ready to go. On the other hand, you might say they have an excuse for being a bit rusty because they haven't played together. Don't forget, at this level, a lot of the players have been all over the world this last week or two playing for their countries. So they are, in that sense, match ready, but they will all have landed back in Manchester on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of this week, and suddenly they've got to prepare for this massive game. So really, this is an imponderable, and we won't know how that has all played out until we see how the match plays out. You know, these are all individual human beings, sportsmen, whose set of circumstances over the course of the last fortnight, they've all been different, each to the other. Some might have been to South America, some might have been to Africa, some would have been relatively close in Europe, and some won't have played at all. And so they all come together, and very quickly they have to become a team again. And this is something we get used to in the Premier League. That's how it is. That is the nature of the global game. And so we'll see. We'll see. In the end, you know, they're all top players, and they have to be able to cope with all of this. And maybe one side will cope better with it than the other. But we won't know that until it plays out in front of us.
Okay, yeah. So the likes of Rafa Varane, who was around last season, but then didn't have a taste of the Manchester derby through injury. There is Malacia, there is Lisandro Martinez, Anthony, Casemiro. All of these guys are going to be having their first taste of the Manchester derby. How will that, again affect United's play if all of these players are to have a look in?
Well, what I would say is that, yes, it will be their first taste of it, but these are big game players. These aren't players who will be frightened of the occasion. Varane is a World Cup winner. He's played in the biggest football match that exists on the planet and won it. Martinez, yes, a young man from Argentina, but he's played with Ajax against Feyenoord or PSV Eindhoven in the Dutch league. Maybe we might consider that not as big as the Manchester derby,
Yeah.
but within the context of that country, those are massive games as well. And he's played major international games. Casemiro has played for Real Madrid against Barcelona. He's not going to be frightened of playing for Manchester United against Manchester City. So whilst it is new and they'll be excitable, and maybe even the most experienced of them may be a little bit nervous about it, I don't think they'll be frightened by it. So I'm not convinced that is necessarily a factor in the game. Because those are players who are used to striding on the biggest stage of them all.
Okay, so let's talk about that young chap, Erling Haaland. It's now a conversation of how many goals is he going to score in the EPL, because he's on course to shatter every, record out there for the insane number of goals lad is scoring, even in the formative moments of the season.
Yes, the trouble is, I think, David, that there's the danger with Haaland for the likes of you and me to turn him into a list of numbers, because his numbers are absolutely ridiculous. He scored 14 goals in his first 9 competitive games for Manchester City, and that is ridiculous. Sometimes when a new striker comes into the league, he doesn't score for a little while, and we say that's okay. He needs time to settle in and understand his new team and the intensity of the league and so on. Haaland hasn't needed any time at all. He has just come in and ripped it up straight away. So his numbers are crazy, but I would rather define him by the athlete he is. He is a remarkable individual. He is so forceful, so physical, and yet so deft. It's not like he's just a big phenomenon. He's not like a tree, a great, big, huge thing that can't be knocked over. He's also a beautifully lithe athlete. He's quick, he's bright, he is the complete package. Who would not want him in their team? And for many, for some years, we said of Manchester City, all they lack is an out-and-out big centre forward. Yeah. Certainly in the year or so since Sergio Aguero was at his best, and Aguero, of course, was a very different player because he wasn't big. But all they have lacked is a natural striker. Well, they have a striker who is so natural that he's almost supernatural. How you play against him, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. I'm looking at who outweighs who. I mean, there's going to be a reunion, though. I mean, Ten Hag and Pep Guardiola, both of them had to work in Bavaria at Bayern Munich between 2013 and then 2015 there. But I mean, these are smart managers, obviously. So I'm looking at how their tactical acumen will come in handy on Sunday in that derby.
Well, it's lovely, of course, for us to have another one of these new head-to-head managerial rivalries. And I think it is going to be a really interesting one of those, along the lines of all the ones we've had back in the past with Ferguson and Wenger and Mourinho and Pochettino and so on. Ten Hag is a new one to throw into that list of big-time bosses. This is the first time he goes eyeball to eyeball with Pep. And Pep doesn't lose many. So if Erik Ten Hag can, in some sense, outwit him, then that really would be a big feather in his cap. That would be a big tick and a massive boost for him and indeed for Manchester United. So again, we'll see. It's impossible for me to sit here and predict to you which one of them will come off, which game plan will be the brightest. Partly because we just don't know. This is unprecedented, and partly because whatever the game plan, in the end, it comes down to the execution of the game plan by the players.
Okay.
In the end, players win the games, and it's going to be fascinating to see which set does do that.
Okay. On account of what you've seen of Manchester United thus far in the season, of course, they had to bounce back from having to lose twice in their opening 2 games, obviously. I'm looking at how far you think they can go under Erik ten Hag.
Well, it is another great imponderable because, listen, however many years we watch this beautiful game for, we never learn, do we? We are always, as fans, terribly reactionary. So, or as onlookers, as neutrals. So Manchester United lose the first couple of games of the season, and we're all saying, this is awful, desperate, the worst ever. They're going to be relegated. They're useless. Yeah. And then they win 4 in a row, and suddenly they become the greatest team there's ever been. They're going to win the league. They're the finest. They're the champions. And we never seem to learn as a football-loving public that there is a middle ground. You know, there is a progress. There are grey areas. It's not all one thing or the other. It can often be something in between. Manchester United look at the moment, and I'm saying this with caution, they look at the moment as though they are capable of playing a very real part in the top 6 argument, maybe the top 5, maybe the top 4, 3, 2. We'll see, maybe 1, maybe not quite 1 yet. We'll see. But if they were to beat Manchester City, they would send out a very, very strong signal. And in terms of the whole league, not just United's part in it, they would shake things up. They would make Manchester City vulnerable. They would show Manchester City to be beatable. But that is a big if. That is a big, big if. Beating Manchester City at the weekend is going to be a tough thing to do, but it's not impossible.
It seems like it will come as an upset to you if United beat Manchester City. Of course, they are coming off wins against one of their greatest foes, Liverpool, and when everybody thought Arsenal were in a very fine form, again, United found a way to beat them. So why must it come across to you as an upset if United are able to beat City?
I can answer that easily, David. It's because, for me, Manchester City are the best team. Manchester City are better than Liverpool. Manchester City are better than Arsenal. And for me, any game that Manchester City lose is an upset. So this is not talking about Manchester United specifically against Manchester City. Any game that City lose is surprising. Now, it would be very surprising if Manchester City didn't lose a game occasionally. Of course they do. But you would be crazy in any given week to predict that they're going to lose, because the probability is, in almost every game they go into, that they're not going to lose it. And that applies as much to the Manchester United game as to any other game. So I'm not doubting that Manchester United are a reinvigorated force. They certainly are. What I'm stating is that Manchester City are a remarkable force. And so any game they lose comes as a surprise to me.